All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We are going to talk about a topic today that is near and dear to my heart, how a culture of consistency can make your brand championship material. My name is Frank Fiume. I'm the founder of I9 Sports and the host of the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. And well, we've got a great panel, so we'll start with Scott. You can start with the introductions.
All right. Does this work? You guys hear me? Yeah, okay, all right. Hey guys, my name's Scott Abbott. I'm one of the founders of 5-Star Painting, CEO of 5-Star Franchising. We're a holding company of 6 home service brands and a customer experience solution called Pronexus. We have about 1,000 franchisees with 1,500 territories.
Hey, I'm Whitney May. I'm using this one. Whitney Mann, Senior Vice President of Brand Operations for East Coast Wings and Grill.
Hello, I'm Christy Mayu, and today my husband and business partner and I are multi-unit franchisees with Massage Envy. We have 131 units, Soul Salon, 60 of those, and then we're also franchisors with a system called Office Pride, where we have partnered with private equity in each of those, and I got my start in franchising over 30 years ago for a franchisor, working there for 20 years, and I ended up running a couple companies that was both Molly Maid and 1-800 Dry Clean. So a long time in franchising.
Chris Birkinshaw, I'm CEO of Aloha Poke. We are a 20-unit operator and franchisor, a poke bowl restaurant chain based out of Chicago.
All right, we got quite the diversified panel here, so we're gonna have some fun. Let's start out with talking about how do you even define what championship culture is throughout your organization?
I wish there was like a button we could just like do a race to answer, you know? I'll go ahead and start. I think one of the things I say often is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And one of the thoughts that I've had on that is that, like, why? Why is culture actually more important than strategy? And I think the best way I can use to describe it is culture is like a belief system. And nothing is more powerful actually than a belief system. So like you can believe, for example, you can have a strategy of franchising, and we all believe that franchising is a good idea, but if you actually believe through and through that franchising is the best way to expand a brand, then the people in the organization really, like, they think about it all the time. They obsess about it. It's actually part of our culture. In fact, it's one of the words we use to describe our company is that we're very driven and we obsess about results. And I think it is, in my view, as a leader of a brand, culture is where it starts. It's the very first step you take into defining what you are as an organization.
I think to add to that, understanding your clear vision, like you have to make sure that what you're projecting out, not only as the franchisor when you're starting your organization, but also as you pass that on to the franchise owners. Our culture is driven by unit level economics. That's what we do. We have data-driven results that we're monitoring daily to make sure that we are passing that along, not only to our team, but again, also to our franchise owners to make sure that they understand what our vision is.
I'm going to take it from a multi-unit franchisee perspective, and we love cultures that really foster collaboration with the franchisees as well as transparency. And what we mean by that is you will develop a lot of trust with your franchisees if you actually share critical information for them to be aware of. For example, we love a franchisor who actually shares with us the national ad spend dollars. So we actually have a vision for what actually goes into that. We love a franchisor that shares leads across the system and gives us visibility into that. That all creates a sense of trust and builds your culture. If you don't share that information, a culture of distrust could be developed, and so that's something to keep in mind as you're developing your organizations early on as emerging franchisors. Figure out ways to actually share that information so you're building a culture of trust and transparency.
You know, when you're selling poke bowls as your main business, it should be fun. And obviously there are points in time when challenges arise or there are issues that aren't fun. But at the end of the day, we're not ambulance drivers, we're not EMTs, we should be having fun. And one of the things I'm proudest of in our company business is extremely low turnover and high retention. And given right now in our size, we're about 50-50 owned and franchised. The company store managers, nearly all have been with us for years. Our original employee is now a district manager for us. They get a lot of our attention and they stay forever. I joke it's like Hotel California, but that's really flowed through to our franchisees. We have extremely high relationships with our franchisees, because your company stores will always be your company stores, but those franchisees really need to know, especially the early ones, that they've got a seat at the table and that we're all pulling the same direction.
Yeah, it's fascinating that culture is sort of like this abstract thing, right? Everybody has sort of a different take that just, it all revolves, of course, around the relationships. One thing I just wanted to add to it, to me, culture is about how we treat one another. It's doing what you say you're going to do for people, and having a special culture means I'm going to run through a wall for my team, and they know it, and they run through a wall for me as well. Okay, since we have emerging franchisors in the room, let's put our focus on what does an emerging franchisor really need to do to really establish that operational culture early on that's going to thrive, that is going to really thrive on consistency.
I'll take that. So I think that establishing your core values and understanding what your culture is putting in place is critical. So if you don't have those core values set out of ours is doing things the right way, respect, integrity, guest services, have fun, and teamwork. So we walk around saying, are you doing it the right way? And as cliche as it is, it goes into our core values of making sure that we are treating everyone with respect, that we are displaying integrity. Our guest is our number one, right? We love to have fun. And then teamwork. I've been with the brand for 20 years this month. I started as a server. So understanding how you can take that and really navigate it with your system of establishing that upfront core value is really going to elevate your system as you grow.
One of the things that I thought would be helpful to share was you want to make sure your franchisees are fully aware of your critical model elements that will determine the success. For example, in a service business, we had franchisees that would sacrifice profitability if they started paying hourly versus a commission structure, which was a key part of Mr. Handyman or Mile and Maid, which we are brother sister companies. And so if you're not explaining to the franchisees why a commission structure, for example, versus straight hourly is better for efficiency and profitability, they may get off track. So we always want to bring it back to what are the critical model elements that will help differentiate them to maintain that consistency so they stay on track with your model versus getting away from it. That's one of the things that I thought would be helpful to share.
What we found, and this is the value of having the company units, is that we try never to use our franchisees as guinea pigs, and always to trial something first and then provide the actual ROI and demonstrated data that we learned during the trial. And we'll do this. We'll start out, we'll pick different real estate types, we'll pick different markets to do it, but we don't want to wake up one day and have unsold inventory in a distribution center franchisees writing a check for. And to be honest, we've tried a lot of stuff that didn't work, and that's okay, because we're the ones taking it, and we're happy to say then when a franchisee says, why aren't we doing this? We'll say, well, we did, we tried, and here's what happened. And believe me, we don't want to do this, so let's get together and come up with a different tactic.
Great. I just want to add one more thing. Founders, I'm talking to you all. As a fellow founder, I made a ton of mistakes, and everything about consistency is only going to be as good as how good your team is operationally. If you have a C player as your franchise business coach, you're not going to get that consistency. It's really going to come down to it starts with your team. So I'm going to come right out and tell you, who do you need to let go that you knew you need to let go of? That's that C player, because that's probably one of the most important decisions you can make while you're here, if you really want that consistency.
Frank, I just want to add on to that.
Yeah, please.
Thought. I think you mentioned a C player, and I think the question becomes, who is a C player? And a C player for you might actually be an A player for me. And I'll just bear with me for one moment. I think when you think of values, there's things that are aspirational values, and then there's actual, like what's actually happening in an organization. And the exercise I think a founder should be doing if you're an emerging brand and you're defining who you are, like telling the world who you are, is ask yourself the question, like go through your A players and start to describe them. And you'll start to see some commonalities. The people you think are the #1 performers in your organization represent certain characteristics you value in the organization. And so if those become the values, those are the actual values you have in your organization, the culture. And then you then use that as a means to now hire, fire, or promote anyone in the organization. And something we use in our organization is something called EOS. You've probably heard it a few times over this past few days. And one of the things in EOS is something called a people analyzer. So once you define your values, ours is driven, real, innovative, vital, and enthusiastic. You've got 5 values. And I take a person that works in my organization and I go, are they plus or minus on those values? Or neutral, like we're not quite sure yet, we're finding that out, right? And if I've got someone who's minus on a value, that is literally something we would fire over. They don't live one of our values. They don't represent who we actually want in the organization. And it doesn't mean that they're not the right person somewhere else. They're just not the right person for us. And so I think as a founder, as you're an emerging concept, what is critical is you need to understand actually how you hire. What's the filter you're going to use to hire somebody? And that's how you start to create culture.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not the people who you had with you when you first franchised.
Because you didn't know.
You didn't know.
You just hired your brother and your uncle and your aunt.
To add on to that, from an emerging standpoint, if you're not able to finance an EOS system, 9box is great. You can just Google it and it's there for you. But I think another key piece to that is to have comprehensive training. Are they a C player because you didn't onboard them correctly? You didn't tell them what your core values were. They don't understand your culture. Are you hiring talent that is experienced in franchising? Or are you hiring someone that was just a director of operations for a corporate-run business versus a franchise business consultant? Because there are differentials there. So when you hire experienced talent, there's a lessened learning curve that becomes shorter, but you also have to make sure that your training and how you bring them into your business is giving them what they need to be successful.
Awesome. All right, so we know when we're starting out, we don't always have all of our rules and structures together, right? When we start out, we're emerging. How does an emerging franchisor get their early franchisees on board when you start implementing the structure and rules that you didn't have when they first started? How do we bring them along?
I love what Chris mentioned where he's test piloting it in his own corporate stores. Not everyone has corporate stores as they're starting to franchise. I guess you would have one corporate store, but you're not sure if that's duplicatable across multiple locations. And so test piloting it once you've been successful in your corporate store, test piloting it with a few franchisees would be extremely critical to gain traction to see what the real adaptability is in your business so that when you go to launch it, you can get better adoption system-wide. For example, you would also want to know the why behind you're asking them to do what they do, and if there's an investment, the cost structure involved in that. And then you're also sharing with them the ROI. If they did implement this, what's in it for me so I can adopt it? Someone else has tested it, someone else has proven it, and you always have a group of franchisees who want to be on the leading edge and helping you test things out. But and those are a great group of franchisees to have testing it out, but always explain the why behind you're doing what you're doing for this additional investment. Otherwise, adoption won't typically be gained because they'll just think one more thing's coming from corporate versus the why behind it, and it's hard to get behind something that they don't understand.
I think there's like so much wisdom in what Christy just said. One more thing coming from corporate. Like there's all kinds of meaning behind that statement. And I think as an entrepreneur or as a founder, I think entrepreneurs in general, they have lots of really good ideas. And by the way, I'm talking about myself as well here. I have great ideas. But we move way too fast in general, right? There's this, oh, shiny, there's this, oh, this is what's going to solve that problem. We move way too fast, and the organization hasn't come with us, and the franchisees haven't come with us. And we just assume that they're going to come along because, well, they bought a franchise, they signed an agreement, they paid the money, they should just do it. I've joked so many times that I can't believe how people will pay me $50,000 to buy a franchise to tell them how to run a business and then not listen to anything I say. Like, it's literally our business model. But the moment you realize that slow is actually fast, and you actually slow everything down and realize you need to bring everyone with you, and you need to show data and experience behind things and get buy-in, suddenly the business becomes a very enjoyable business.
I think Chris could probably relate to this too, but coming from the restaurant space, our best ideas come from the unit level. Some of the best recipes, we have over 50 wing flavors, so a lot of those were unit level driven. So when we get them into a collaborative effort versus them being savage and doing what they want to do, and then we find out about it through a field visit, like, they're selling what? We want to make sure that they have an open forum, that they could submit recipes to us as well to get them into that understanding that we want to work together.
For us, one of our very earliest franchisees, he's an amazing operator, he's become a good friend, but this guy is so resistant to any kind of change, it doesn't matter what it is. And at first, it would just want to bang my head against the wall because my instinct is just to pull out the contract and be like, Tom, this is what it is. We're making this change. Get on board, man. But I realized that he would do this with everything, and then after a day, he would cool down a little bit, and after another day, he'd cool down a little bit, and by the third day, I'd get on a phone call or get in the car and go see the guy, and the next thing you know, he's on board. So I figured out it's just relationship with this individual that's really the key to driving it. When he's resistant to something, it's because of, despite data, despite a good business case, it's really just the guy wants some attention, and I give it to him. But yes, so many of the best ideas can come at the unit level, and as you start to expand from a regional basis to a national one, obviously there are different preferences. In our case, for example, a specific one, when we first came to the Houston market, there was apparently this tremendous demand for surimi imitation crab salad that we just didn't have in Chicago. Literally no one had ever asked for it. But the people of Houston apparently really love imitation crab. So we got to work, and in collaboration with our franchisees, came up with a product, and now it's selling well throughout the entire system. But we wanted to kind of take that on ourselves, again, trial it out, and then something that would scale across the entire system rather than all of a sudden wake up one day with regional differences.
I guess it comes down to, it was talked about yesterday, franchise owners don't like surprises. And communicate. You can't do it early enough, right? Let's move along to really kind of like maintaining brand standards. I'd love to get everybody's feedback on what technology and how technology plays a role in all of your brands in maintaining that consistency.
I think we have a pretty large tech stack for a company our size, but we use safety culture for, we call them IVRs, an impactful field visit. Our field coaches understand that when they're visiting a unit, they cannot leave unless they make an impact, and it has to be something that moves the needle. We also just brought on Delight Tree for our knowledge base and training system. So that was in July. So we're onboarding all of the employees and team members at the unit level to get them involved as well to make sure that we have that brand consistency. We just launched Operation Summit last year. We had our second one earlier this month, and we saw that there was a lot of inconsistencies. So how in our brand recipes specifically. So how can we take those and navigate the team members to have just a recipe a week that they're doing to understand what that consistency is, but it's the follow through and then the follow up from that. Send us a picture of your recipe and how you're doing it to make sure that we see that it's consistent and we can coach to it if it's not. So those are just a couple of the platforms that we've adopted.
having a consistent experience for the customers is extremely important. And we are a part of a large system. I won't name which one it is, but they have a CRM that no one knew how to use, and they didn't have the pipeline developed for taking a client all the way through the process for closing them and then ongoing from there. And so because we're such a large group and we've run franchisors before and still do today, we actually are more sophisticated than our franchisor is. So we're assisting them in adopting our platform that was given to us by them for actually developing the sales pipeline. So if it's something that you don't have developed today, from taking a customer once they enter your system all the way to closing them, a great CRM is extremely important. Many people have talked about it. It'll help you advance your brand. Equally important is a applicant training system, tracking system, ATS, because most of our businesses are related to employees. Bet yours are as well if you're a service-related business or food-related business. And having a great system for your franchisees to actually track their applicants through the process, just like you would a lead nurturing program for your customers, having that for the employees is extremely important to maintain a pipeline of employees as well. So I'd encourage folks to really consider how they have both those systems in place as they're helping their franchisees launch, because the CRM, you probably have that for the customers. If you don't, that's the first thing to figure out. But equally as important is the applicant system for the employee development, so that they can have that game plan in place as well.
First, I'd be curious to hear from a food concept.
So when you're serving raw fish as your primary meal, food safety is paramount. It's number one. It's everything. We use a system. They were called Squaddle. They've been acquired by a firm called Crunch Time. That's a workflow management on an iPad that all of our stores and franchisees have and use. But the coolest thing about it to me is that they've got these Bluetooth cordless thermometers that for like line and temperature and cooler checks, it just wirelessly pings the exact temperature of the item once it's inserted into the prepared food. And then this all gets uploaded. We know who did it. There's no pencil whipping, where if you've ever done a field visit and seen a temperature sheet that's all 39 degrees, and you're like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I sleep better at night, and we can literally look 3 times a day. You can look in real time. It gets bubbled up throughout the layers of the organization to track that. So that's been terrific for us. The other I'd say is that joining a GPO with a supply chain consultancy is absolutely fantastic. Not only does it help on the cost side of things and managing the direct relationships that we have with our primary suppliers, but those audits that they help perform can not only identify any pricing irregularities and get those sorted fast, but during a period when supply chain has not always been consistently executed or availability of products can be limited, it helps us know what and how much our franchisees are buying, and we monitor this constantly, both to make sure that it's the right products that meet our standards, but also that they're achieving the best cost of goods sold that they can.
Great. Well, when it comes to culture, it's certainly difficult to have a great culture when the unit level economics aren't great, right? A wise mentor many years ago when I was starting out, and quite honestly, my franchise owners were struggling with their own profitability, a wise mentor said to me, Frank, you could only sell the dream for so long until you got to start getting results. And so with that said, I'd love for you guys to share with me when unit level profitability is challenged. Let's talk specifically about the rising costs or economic downturns, and how do you maintain franchisee morale, and what strategies do you use to help them address these external problems?
Communication. You have to keep them involved. If you're looking at what we talk about, controlling the middle of the P&L, evaluate all of that. talk to them, go through every single line item to see if there is an opportunity for cost savings. If you have like-kind units that you can overlay and see, you know what, maybe their linen service is a little bit out of line based on the tier group that they're in, we need to have that conversation. So find other ways that you can minimize some of those expenses while we understand that other things are inflated, and while we're going to monitor those and we're going to do everything that we can to try to help minimize that, we have to make sure that the other items are also in line so they're not being overlooked while we have the big, thing in front of us. For us, it's supply chain and food costs. So we want to make sure that while that's a thing, we're also looking at everything else to help mitigate some of that pain point.
I think that's a real challenge, right? Like, we're in home services. Over the last several years, if you've been in home services, the cost of acquisition has gone up a lot. I mean, I dare say it's probably double or if not triple in terms of acquiring a lead and making the phone ring for any of our brands. So, how do you navigate that? I think there's a number of ways. I think the short answer is everyone can go through a lot of hard things if they have hope and they believe that they can get to where they want to get to, right? And the moment they don't have that, then morale goes out the window. And so how do you create hope for better outcomes? And some of that comes from great marketing campaigns. Some of that comes from things like using ad fund to co-op some spends with franchisees to find another way of generating leads. Some that comes from recognizing franchisees who are really are successful in their category and putting them on a podium, letting them talk to their franchisees about what's working. But in general, that is the challenge. Is you've got to stay in front of it. You have to show franchisees they can get there, and you have to be constantly innovating and finding ways to make the phone ring for your owners.
I would encourage folks who have large build-out costs to always be shopping for ways that you can actually help franchisees still maintain professionalism in the build-out cost, but also look for ways that can be minimized. That's something that's close, maybe not as expensive as something else, but it's going to be good enough because it's not a true differentiator when someone has that experience. Right now, I love Scott's point about giving them hope. We have a brand that the cost of the build-out's probably gone up 30%. We want to continue to build. We have hope that they're going to bring down the cost because they're actually educating us on all the things that they're doing to research it, put an investment against the research to help bring down those costs. That's given us great hope for the future, that when we go to develop in another 6 to 9 months, those costs be brought down so we feel good about the ROI on investing in a new property. So always be communicating, even if you don't have the complete answer, letting your franchisees know what you're doing to actually research costs, someone's actually owning it, and that it will be brought down over time, gives a franchisee the hope that they can still plan for that future, that next build out, and everyone still needs that hope that you're working on their behalf to bring down costs.
During the pandemic, restaurant technology just exploded, and it was I think really underserved prior to that, but all of a sudden there were digital solutions for literally anything and everything. Lots of startups, lots of money involved. Our franchisees are multi-unit, multi-brand operators, and we realized really quickly that those technology costs were a pain point with them with their other brands. And so for us, it's being really judicious about who are the technology suppliers that are a must-have and what are the nice-to-haves. And that looks different if you're a franchisee building your first location. Those must-haves and nice-to-haves is probably different than a more developed market is. So when we're evaluating technology suppliers, we're really take our time and decide how many of our boxes does this check, how few platforms with multiple capabilities can we put in our stack, and what's something that's an obligation to a franchisee to add, and what's something that's a nice to have, a benefit, an option if it helps grow their business.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to tack on to the whole part about providing franchise owners hope, because our job, I think, as leaders is we need to make sure that the franchise owners have that roadmap, right? It's because we talk a lot about like KPIs and what we're really measuring, But at the end of the day, it's about what activities do they need to do that will inevitably impact those KPIs and giving them that hope so that they can see exactly from point A how to get to point B, right?
Yeah, one other point that to help them maintain consistency is to do everything in your power to decrease that admin burden. This also helps the cost. So think about ways or platforms related to technology, as Chris was putting it, that can decrease their admin burden, that actually can have technology do that for them, or create a series of admin things that they need to do that takes care of them for them. For example, Scott just mentioned the cost of the customer going up dramatically. Maybe some of you are unaware, especially in the service business, what we experienced, that our franchisees didn't always capture every lead that came in by answering the call live or by responding quickly enough of what we need to do with a Solo Pro candidate. So developing technologies or responding to customers that come in immediately, all of that, developing technology, and there's plenty of vendors out there. One of our favorites is Pocket Suite that we work with, that really helps with businesses like this, that help to decrease the admin burden, help to capture the lead as it's coming in, give it to the franchisee an easy way to respond, can back market. All of those things are extremely critical to decreasing the admin burden, so you decrease the overall cost of actually customer acquisition. And we find a lot of franchisees don't realize the impact it's having on their business by not responding quickly or getting all over every lead that comes in.
I just want to add on to that, just
Please.
as an example. You can doing more with less, right? And that is what we're talking about. How do you be more efficient? In home services, if you went back 10 years ago, almost all homeowners would not think to go online to schedule a job, right? And in one of our brands, as an example, Bath Solutions, we do one-day bath, okay? It's about 35 to 40% of all of our appointments are now scheduled online. They don't talk to a human being. There's no cost. It's frictionless, and it's easy. It can happen at any point in time. And that's a simple thing that an emerging brand can be doing, making it easy for your customer to book with you or buy from you online. That in alone can decrease your costs and increase your revenue. So,
Great. When we're starting out, again, think about the emerging space. I've found that at least most of my early franchise owners they were risk takers, right? They were taking a risk on me. They knew maybe I didn't have everything figured out, but they were good with it. How do we get those early franchisees, though? What tactics are you guys using to get those early adopter franchisees on board who specifically really resist the operational consistency? Whitney, you are shaking your head yes.
Communication. I think that Chris made a good point when he said that he got in the car and went and visited them. If you're having resistance, get in front of them. Now we have so much technology that we could pop up a Zoom. It's still not the same, but being in front of them and having the conversation and seeking to understand why they are being resistant. I could take it back to the recipe thing. We could have somebody who has a great idea that they want to, the brand should do this and we should really adopt this. Well, it might not be a good fit for all markets. It might be a regionalized thing that we participate in, but we have to understand where their resistance is coming from, and the best way to get that from them is asking them.
One element that I would add would be to use your other franchisees to actually sell the benefits of why the specific standards are the way they are, how it impacts their profitability. So much greater adoption can come from someone else doing it for you and speaking for you. So giving your best franchisees a platform, either in a webinar where you're interviewing them to share how that specific element has impacted their business, or on stage during a convention, would be critical. We are a part of conferences where it's all corporate speaking, and I gotta tell you, it's the most boring conference for a franchisee out there, because you've got a bunch of folks on stage who've never run one of our businesses, and that doesn't have the same impact that if you put franchisees who are actually doing it every day out there with them to actually share best practices and why those are critical. It can make a huge difference in your overall adoption of the best practices. Don't think that you have to have all the answers, because franchisees don't believe you always do. So make sure you're using other franchisees as your best sharer of the best model elements to maintain that consistency and the why behind it.
And put them on a committee together, right? If you don't have a franchise advisory council, that's something that you can consider. A menu committee for us, we have that. So getting them together to have that collaboration with their fellow brethren will also help them navigate what the resistance is.
Yeah, I'd give all franchisees that are following the standards you've got megaphones. Amplify their voice. You want them speaking about whatever you want them speaking about, way more than you're speaking about it.
Totally. And it was mentioned yesterday about the use of, like, I'm going to use a term we used in my company, a network scorecard, where you see everybody's stats. And suddenly the folks that maybe are struggling, that sometimes are the loudest, it kind of quiets them up and hopefully gets people on board.
I've been a part of franchise systems where they're not sharing it from day one. And so if you're in that position where you're not sharing critical elements from day one, I was part of, as the president, I had to launch it with my franchisees when I had about 200 franchisees. That went from no technology to technology, and then sharing of best practices where we could actually do that. And you're going to get some backlash, but it's well worth it. So those few franchise owners who are embarrassed of their numbers, when I said I'm still going to do it, there's nothing in the agreement, but you're going to see who you can go to actually improve your numbers. So please bear with us as we launch this new program. It'll be worth it in the long run, but you've got to bite the bullet and do it at some point earlier rather than later, so your early franchisees know what's coming and they just get used to it. It's a lot better. So the earlier you bite the bullet and share keep metrics, the better, because you'll be paying for it in the long run. But even if you have not done it early on, I still encourage you to do it, because other franchisees need to be aware of those that key metrics of others that are struggling, who to go to help get the answers. And they're spotlighted in those ways, so they actually have the credibility. The last thing you want to do is have someone that's really poor in, like, customer retention, for example, sharing with another franchisees how they handle customer retention because their numbers don't validate it. So making sure they have the data behind the credibility is really critical as well.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to so much in franchising, where that Venn diagram of franchisor interests and franchisee interests, whenever those can overlap as much as possible, the best outcomes occur. And so when we think of and posit items, it's where we think of it and position it as a layer of support. If it's a new supplier contract, this is something that we've negotiated. It's going to lift all ships, and that Venn diagram is pretty overlapped. If it's we want creative to be consistent in the stores. I don't know if you've ever seen a franchisee who likes to print their own signs and tape them up, but we hate it. And so then it's, okay, instead of this, here is our asset library of materials that we've made. We'll help with custom stuff. I just don't want to see the piece of printer paper taped on the door anymore. So it's thinking of this as something that we need to provide and layer in as support, but at the same time, it benefits us in the system because it's a compliance component as well. So it's just trying to really think of anything where we're seeing any obstacles with franchisee adoption, and looking at it through the lens of how can we pitch this and have it really be a support element instead.
Great. Yeah, I just want to also add on the scorecard or getting franchise owners on board. I resisted the idea because I thought it was going to just cause complete havoc throughout my system, and I was totally wrong. The franchise owners actually loved it, and it, believe it or not, inspired them. I did not see that coming. More times than not, the things I thought were going to cause chaos, they actually liked, and the things that I thought were like, oh, this is easy, a no-brainer, end up causing all sorts of havoc in my organization. So go figure. But it ended up inspiring them. So, of course, the bigger your brand gets, the more difficult it's going to be. So do it, sooner rather than later. Let's talk about advice that you would give to a franchisor that's struggling to establish that culture of consistency because they want to be friendly with the franchise owners. They don't want to ruffle feathers, and they want to be liked. and they want to make sure that they kind of keep this culture of family. What do you have to say to that, guys?
Oh my goodness. If you got into franchising because you want more friends, you're in the wrong business. Like, and I know we all want to have friends and we want to have that relationship that's has a camaraderie, but do not ever think that someone bought your franchise because they want to be your friend. Please, they bought your franchise because they want to make money and they want to provide for their families and they want to have freedom. Like, that is like literally it. So my advice to you is, if you always keep it the center of your attention, the economic success of your franchisee, the friendship thing will come. So.
I've heard from a lot of you that some of your first franchise owners are friends and family. If you haven't read the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a CEO, likability versus accountability, you have to make sure that even if you're friendly with them, that you also have that accountability factor. And that goes back to all the things that we've talked about thus far. If you have the right core values in place, your systems in place, your comprehensive training in place, and you're providing them the systems that they need to navigate their business to be successful, and you're communicating with them, then there is an ease into being friendly, but it still gives you the leverage to have those hard conversations when you need to, and don't be afraid to.
Yeah, just to piggyback, high relationship doesn't necessarily mean, drinking buddies or friendship. It's just exactly what it is: high relationship, engagement, understanding goals and outcomes, and what drives the franchisees and what drives the business forward, so that when there are challenges and there are hard times, you have the open dialogue, you have the relationship, not friendship, but relationship, to make tough decisions. And at the end of the day, sometimes either party needing to live with one or the other. But I think that high relationship means you talk it out, you argue it out, you hug it out sometimes, but
Over a drink.
Yeah, and sometimes that too. But relationships are critical. But at the end of the day, we're in business, and this is a contract. Yep.
I will take it from a slightly different perspective. If you have the majority of your franchisees not following the system, go back to figuring out why. Right. Have they figured out a better way around you to do something that you need to research and strongly consider? Is that an area I need to rethink? So as a franchisor, I think we want to be careful not to say, I know more than the franchisees. I would figure out the why behind, if there's a large group not following that specific element of your model or system, find out the why behind it, because it might be something worthwhile to change.
Yeah, like look in the mirror, right? Franchisor. And it comes down to us, most likely. Yeah, I would urge folks to stop the Wild West now, for another reason too. For those that were not around during the recession in 2008, for those of you that were around, you remember there was quite a cleansing in franchising. In other words, mediocre franchisors, you can get away with stuff when the economy is pretty good. I can promise you the next time there's another version of '08 and another recession, those that don't have their act together are not going to be around. They won't be in this room.
Actually, we're seeing that today a little bit, in that because of the great times, a lot of companies were over leveraged, and now you're seeing a lot more bankruptcies out there, not just in the franchise industry, in retail, lots of other locations. So you want to be very careful in building your system in an effective way, because there's a lot of larger systems are paying for it today, retail or even a lot of restaurant businesses. So be very careful in how you're building your system, because those things always come back to bite you over time if it's only built on leverage and not a strong foundation.
And this is all about culture. It's making sure that we're doing the right thing, that we have consistency, and that everybody's doing well, and that we're not putting out a mediocre results. Okay. All right, gang. If you could go back in time early in your franchise journey and maybe change one aspect operationally, what would it be?
Visiting them more for us. I think that as you're growing, you don't have the team on the corporate side to be able to, grow through that with them, but just making sure that you have in your business plan when you need to drop those team members in as you bring new units on, so that you can accommodate those field visits, and making sure that your systems and processes that you've put in place that you hold so near and dear are actually being executed and held accountable. I think that's something for us as we grew and had, Sam likes to call it pulling the throttle back. We'll pull the throttle back, we'll reevaluate everything, every system that we have before we push again to say, all right, we're ready to grow again. And sometimes that means bringing on new team members or circulating through team members if we feel like we're not having someone that is moving the needle.
There's a question here. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think it's a little bit of both. Great question. So Scott Greenberg says it very well that we're responsible for the circumstantial piece of our business. So if we see things changing in the economy, or we see things like what the C word we will not mention, those things make us reevaluate how we're navigating our current franchise owners who have already bought into our business. Take care of them. Let's make sure that they are wildly successful in understanding the systems as we've had to change or grow with them through these things before you put the throttle back on to bring new blood into the system. They're already here. I kind of relate that to our restaurants as well from a guest perspective. Take care of the guest that's already in your building. They chose you. They're here. Don't worry so much about throwing on the marketing throttle that says, I need top line sales, I need top line sales. Well, quit screwing up what you have inside your four walls already and take care of that operations. And that's, of course, how we, from an operations standpoint, validate whether they're ready for marketing or not. So I think going back to the franchisor side of it and bringing in new franchise owners, it's all very similar in how you navigate that. But you have to make sure that all the circumstances align, and you have to know what those are for your business.
Frank, and one of the things that I probably used over and over again with any team, quite frankly, to gain adoption is, I can remember having a discussion when it's my franchisor days, with one of my marketing team members, and she was really frustrated that a new program creative that she had developed was really awesome in her mind, and she went to launch it the franchisee system-wide, and they gave her a lot of negative feedback. And I said, Melinda, you're going to pay for it on one end or the other. Either you get their feedback in advance before you launch it, and oh, by the way, their feedback's probably closer to what the customer is looking for than what ours is, or you pay for it in the long run by getting their feedback after the fact, where you got to change what you just spent a lot of money in adopting and putting out there. So gaining franchisees' input on and buy-in adoption to make it better before you go launch something is extremely important. That could go for your employees as well. We're finding that in our multi-units, that we're going to develop a new policy or process. Let's get the people's feedback that actually have to implement it before we go launch something corporately that really won't get adopted because something's wrong with it. So I'd encourage, if I had to train my early self to know this earlier on, I would have asked franchisees much earlier on in the process for their feedback before launching it and paying for it after the fact, because the one costs a lot more money and slows down progress.
Great point.
I'll just add on to a thought. I mean, I'm going back 20 years. So it's been a while. So in 2004, Five Star Painting started, and we were so obsessed about margins and acquiring customers at a low cost that was a detriment to our business. And we attracted a lot of franchisees who had that kind of a mindset of spending very little to make a lot. And that doesn't work at scale. And I look at what our business looks like today and some of the franchisees we're bringing in today and the capital that they have to put to work and the difference. Like we had last year a franchisee start at $3.2 million in their very first year of revenue, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And it all came down to the fact that we kind of shed this idea that we could try and be really efficient with everything around marketing and just go way bigger. And having franchisees that start in a much higher level of revenue is a really important thing for your FDD, your item 19, franchisee success that sets it all up properly. And we just went too small at the beginning.
One thing I wish we'd done earlier in our journey is really standardize and engage franchisees regularly on local marketing. You know, we found, especially given the experience level of a number of the franchisees who came on board, that each had sort of a slightly unique version of what local marketing looks like. We've got, you know, the one who walks flyers around the malls once and is like, cool, I'm done. We've got another guy who was doing these Valpak direct mails every single month at a really insane cost, but not tracking any of the results that were coming in. So there's no way to draw a direct line. Often the franchisees who need to be spending a little more on marketing are the ones who want to spend it the least. And so they need a little hand-holding, they need a little data, they need a little, this is a proven tactic, and let's start and go from there. So, you know, we've, now we've got a pretty good playbook that we're deploying in every market, really largely reorienting spend toward digital with the demonstrated ROI, with levers you can pull on, how much you want to spend and when. And I've found that using that as sort of the baseline rather than, well, what do you want to do, Randy, is far more effective in delivering the results and really just being able to measure it throughout the system and to scale stuff that's working.
Yeah, Chris, I'll add to that because I feel the same way. I wish I had a better sense of exactly the results you get from specific activities and said, if you do this, this is the expected result, rather than just saying, here are the 3 KPIs that we're measuring. But because it comes down to, what do I need to do to get those KPIs, right? And be able to perform. And I honestly didn't have that early on, like so many of us. All right, let's talk about how we balance this whole thing with having this consistent brand that we want to still innovate. We don't want to stifle innovation. So exactly how can an emerging franchisor ensure that consistency doesn't stifle the innovation and creativity so that we keep growing and introducing new things?
Communication. I think the biggest thing with that is the follow-up. So even what you were talking about with local store marketing, we had a great community involvement presence when we launched the brand, and we still do, but we didn't follow up as well as we should have. So I think that can go throughout every piece of the business, is if you are implementing things and you want to make sure that you're getting your objectives across and following the KPIs and you're making data-driven decisions, that you're also following up with the franchise owners to get their feedback inside of it, and even from the management levels, because some are absentee, right? Not every owner is in their business. They have people operating their business for them. And I think that their input is critical to make sure that we're staying on track with that.
I think you can, when you get to a big enough size, create an innovation committee that operates within certain parameters that say, all right, a lot of ideas come from the franchisees, of course, that need to be vetted by a group, and then someone needs to volunteer to test it and see if the ROI is there or the adoption's going to be there from the customer base. So at some point, you may want to consider an innovation committee that actually has that direct line to get the feedback from the franchisees on new things that they may want to consider testing, but make sure you've got a strong system that actually measures it a defined period of time so that you know the results and the actual payback, if it's worth the extra investment and that type of thing. Could be something to consider for the future.
Every time and on every store visit, it doesn't matter whose it is, I'm asking the questions, what's on the menu that doesn't sell, and what don't we have that people are asking for? And it's pretty interesting because it's one thing to have a a Zoom or a meeting with a franchisee, but it's the men and women who are working behind the counter, interacting with customers. Those are the ones who have those some of those ideas. And additionally, they're often experienced kitchen people who are pretty creative and can come up with some really cool stuff. So for us, it's just evaluating and just talking with really every level, particularly those closest to our customers, on how we can not be stagnant and continue to evolve with the consumer.
Yeah, I think innovation is happening throughout our entire company all the time. And if you're monitoring their P&L and knowing what their margins look like, and you're monitoring their sales levels, you're seeing franchisees experience something that's explosive growth or abnormal growth, then that's where you drill in and you ask the questions.
Cool, thanks. All right, we got a few more minutes. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. Anybody have anything they'd like to ask anybody here on the panel? Please.
So she asked for a framework of communication because I said it so many times. So internally, we use Slack. So we think that is, keeping everyone involved, and we believe in transparency, right? We have our executive team that, of course, has inner circle communication that we don't release to the team until the time is right, but making sure that you are having weekly meetings with your department leaders so that they're able to be aligned with what the executive team and the CEO is funneling down through to you. From a franchisor to franchisee framework perspective, we put out a weekly newsletter, and I'm very cautious about it because I was one of the operators. I don't want to be administratively tasked. I don't need to sit in an office and read a 20-page newsletter that is probably just fluff that you put together because you had to have content to give to the person who's putting the newsletter together. So making sure that it's very concise. 5 nuggets is a really good thing to try to stick with, of just saying, these are the 5 top things that we need to talk about this week. Something that's been in our newsletter for the last 3 months is the case cost of wings, because that's our biggest seller. So we want to show you that it's going up, it's going down, it's going sideways. Whatever the case may be, we want to communicate the things that are most important to them for them to digest, and that they can easily then translate that message to their team. And then from the franchisor to the franchise owner communication framework, we have a monthly newsletter that just goes to them. You guys heard Sam talk earlier about how we provide them all their numbers. We have a section in there called Wingman Wisdom, where we feature a franchise owner every month and get a burning question that our field coaches have brought back from the field. So I think that all of that together, and it's free, right? You can pay for Slack, but sending an email costs you nothing. But making sure that it's concise and that you're not word vomiting on them with information that's really not relative to their operations.
I would just add on to that, you should be doing town halls. If you're not doing town halls, start doing them. And we do them quarterly. Our brand presidents do them with the brand specifically. I think it's every month, if not every 2 weeks.
And if you don't know what that is, just Google it or ChatGPT it. It'll tell you and give you the framework of how to set one up.
Great. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
How do you balance consistency and excellence in franchisees dealing with clients and innovation and all those new products that come in the system? Why franchisees not being consistent with the rest of the franchisees?
So consistency comes from making sure that you're communicating with them. If they don't have clear understanding of what your expectations are as the franchisor, then they're not going to execute the systems that you put in place. That's what this business is about. They got into business for themselves, but not by themselves. So if you give them the system that they can follow, that's easily duplicatable, then they should be able to replicate that consistency process. And if they're not, then I agree with Frank. You need to look in the mirror.
Always explain the why behind why that is the way it is. Because I think people will adopt when they understand the why a lot more easily than just being told to do something. So always explaining why the system is the way that it is, why that product sale is the way that it is, and how to sell it most efficiently. I think you get a lot more adoption when they're bright people. Help them understand the why behind it is the way it is.
Yeah, never say because daddy said so. Anybody else? All right, we are right on time. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys, appreciate it.